This is just a follow-up resource, and as I said in the notes of my slides, I've got a link to this. So this is a report that came out, just recently in 2018, on 2 decades since that To Err is Human came out, and reporting what's changed. And you'll see the highlights there in the abstract that unfortunately, we're making some progress, but in the last 20 years, what's happened is there's new areas of safety risk that's been identified. One of those is diagnostic errors. One of those is the use of health information technology. But the authors Brian would know these guys, and I know both of them well as well. They're just legends in our field. They do a lot of stuff on safety and informatics. So they've said that with the increasing availability of electronic data, because what did happen in America in those 20 years is the majority of hospitals in America all became fully digital. So now we have all this electronic data. We now need to make investments in developing and testing methods to routinely and continuously measure the frequency and types of patient harm, and even predict risk of harm for specific patients. So here it is 20 years later, and we still don't have agreed ways of, standard approaches to how we collect this type of data. How do we define the data? How do we use it? How do we report on it? That is still a work in progress, unfortunately. So here's something else, another example from Victoria. So this poor gentleman died, as you can see, and I will just read a bit of this article out in case your screen is small, because I know the font is small if it is. So the gentleman was alone in a hotel room near Shepparton, which is outside of Melbourne, when he was found dead from complications that arose from his chemotherapy treatment of Hodgkin's lymphoma, which is a type of cancer. Hotel staff opened the door of his room on the morning of November the 17th to find the 58-year-old father of 2 deceased in his bed, fully clothed in jeans and a t-shirt, and a lit torch beside him. And now Victoria coroner report was investigating how he died. And the coroner ruled that his lonely death, and thinks it was a terrible, sad death for this gentleman all alone in a hotel room, that it could have been prevented had he not been let down by a series of systematic failures by the medical profession. And effectively, he had some, it was a fax machine. So a fax, which is a very old way that we still use all the way through healthcare, a scan conducted showed signs that his lung was in trouble, thanks to the cancer treatment, and the scan of the fax of that scan went to the wrong number. It didn't go to the right doctor, and so it meant that he basically was taking a drug that was toxifying his lungs, and it killed him while he was away from his family, having treatment in Melbourne. And it's interesting when the coroner, when legal people get involved in cases like this, and she called for the development of national standards around the communication of results. Back to our earlier comment and Thay's comment, it's like, how is this possible? This is 2015, and because there's not a standard way of communicating results, and we're still using fax machines that can go into the wrong fax number. You press 3 instead of an 8, and you have no idea. The fax machine doesn't warn you that it was wrong. So we don't have national standards, and she said it is difficult to understand why such an antiquated and unreliable means of communication exists at all in the medical profession. So again, coming back to those issues of ethics about how we design healthcare, how we communicate information. Here's a fun cartoon. I tried to think of a few light things, but it's tough. And so, and it's a bit blurry. The doctor says, "Oh my, that is a typo. So you were expecting the collagen injection in your lips and the liposuction on your hips." So you'll see the ha-ha result there. So, there's a medical error, and the clinician, instead of injecting her lips, sucked out all the fat out of them and instead injected her in her hips. So that little funny cartoon, here's a real life story. So this is from Alana Henderson. This was where she told her patient story at our conference a couple of years ago. And effectively, Alana had a stroke, a massive stroke, was rushed to hospital. And her talk, and we will come back to Alana's story in a future lecture when we're talking about patients and consumer approaches to this stuff. She tried to be quite humorous. You can see there in the picture, she's holding up her medical record, which she managed to get a copy of. She had trouble as a stroke. Like she obviously survived the stroke, but she was in hospital afterwards, and she couldn't speak properly, which is quite common, and other physical symptoms that happened as a result of her stroke. And she said proudly in her speech at the conference that she fled the hospital 9 days after her stroke because she was so disgusted at the quality of care that she was receiving as being poor. And so she discharged herself home, petitioned the hospital to get a copy of her medical record, which she eventually got. And she said, she's quite funny, this lady, and she said that her medical record was a work of pure fiction, or a poor work of fiction. She found 72 errors. And look at that, like that's less than an inch thick, her medical record. It's not like it's a big, long, thick thing that's been following around her whole life. That's probably just from her hospital stay about this particular issue. 72 errors. And something that you would expect not to be an error is her date of birth was wrong. So on the front of her medical record, it had a date which made her 59 years of age, which was correct. But inside, there were various assessments and notes that had a different date of birth, which meant that she was 80 years old. How you treat someone who's had a stroke, or like she had a fall and that was mishandled as well. Someone who's 60 compared to someone who's 80, that makes a big difference. And so one of the things that she has now become a proponent for, she's not a fan of the healthcare system, as you can imagine. She's not a fan of the medical professions, but she is a fan of patients having access to their own information. So here's a real live example from Alana, who how many of us have ever, like I've never actually asked my doctors for a copy of my record. One day, especially if I'm particularly ill, I certainly will be doing that. But she found 72 errors. So yes, it happens. From American Magazine earlier last year, death by 1,000 clicks where electronic health records went wrong. So this article, as I mentioned earlier, and you guys would have already covered that, but in America, there's a huge amount of money has been spent, and this article quotes it as being $36 billion of money has been spent in America to digitalize healthcare records in American hospitals. And it was supposed to make healthcare better, safer, and cheaper. And this article goes into detail about why that's not necessarily what ended up happening. And here's a clip from that article, where once again someone died, and the doctor had considered the possibility that this person would have had an aneurysm, and to rule it out, he ordered a head scan through the clinic's software system. So it is electronic. He's putting an order in for a scan using the electronic system that the hospital has. And the government did say that happened. But in theory, that test should have actually caught the bleed in his brain, and it would have saved his life or prevented him from having an adverse event in hospital. But even though they were using electronic records, the doctor had made the scan prescription for the scan. The order never made it to the lab. It was never actually transmitted. So again, this is, as I feel bad, but I told you, I did warn you up front, there was going to be lots of just bad stuff I was going to be telling you about. It's quite shocking. And so just because we've got electronic medical records doesn't mean that removes safety concerns. Here's something from primary care. This was only from just before lockdown, I think a week before lockdown or something. I was at a conference, and friends of mine presented some research they were doing in primary care, and they're effectively trying to have the language that we use in primary care standardized in some way. And as part of them building a case for why that is required, here's and sorry it's a bit green, my phone did that when I was taking a picture of their slide. So it was only a small study, but they found 651 variants of the word anxiety. So the word anxiety, which only has one spelling anywhere around the world, or in English at least, it's 651 variants. So basically 651 typos were made, or 650 typos. There was one that was actually correct. And then when I tweeted that out, Adam sent a reply. This was his reply to the tweet, that their data set has over 1 million patients in it with a diagnosis of anxiety, and yet there's, of that, 404,000 have anxiety, but there's an additional 29,002 variants on this. Like, we make mistakes when we document things. The need, and that's another reason Westworld is far, far away, at least when it comes to healthcare, because if we're going to have good quality artificial intelligence, artificial intelligence relies on, data input, right? And if the data that's getting inputted is crap, and it really is, a lot of the times it's very poor quality, looking at these 651 variants, 29,000 variants of the word anxiety, these errors are ongoing. Does someone want to comment? Oh, they're just off mute.
Well, I think that these examples of, and I've been working on collecting some of just like an institution's name. I think the guy I worked with, there were around 30 different ways the University of Utah was typed in medical imaging headers.
Yeah.
So that's not too deadly, but yeah, just.
No, but yeah, it's the same systemic problem.